Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
He wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for scrap. The rust-colored dust of Kelmar crunched beneath Corey Ryden's boots as he navigated the wreckage. What had once been a sprawling military outpost was now a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Morning light filtered through the perpetual haze that hung over the planet, casting long shadows across the desolation. Corey adjusted his filtration mask, the worn straps cutting into his weather-beaten face. 36 hours since his last proper meal, and the recycled air tasted stale in his lungs. His pack weighed heavy with meager findings. Power cells, circuit boards, a handful of mineral rods that might fetch enough for a week's rations. A man without a flag or a name. Corey lived beyond all maps. Where war doesn't end, it just gets forgotten. He had carved out an existence in this no-man's land after deserting his post years ago, fleeing a conflict that had lost all meaning. His old identity was buried somewhere beneath the rubble, just like everything else on this godforsaken rock. Planet Kelmar was considered cleared after the conflict between the Central Corporation and the Returned Alliance. The official reports claimed successful pacification. Victory had been declared, treaties signed, but the dead hadn't left. They lay under dust, under wreckage, in graveyards of steel, and sometimes inside armor. Corey's scanner emitted a faint ping, something metallic buried beneath a collapsed section of wall. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through his damaged right leg, an old wound that never healed right. His calloused hands dug through the debris, fingernails cracking as they scraped against concrete fragments. Then he saw it, a glint of dark metal, surprisingly free of corrosion. Heart pounding, he worked faster. This wasn't just another fragment. This was intact. As he cleared away more rubble, the full shape emerged. A mercenary suit, the kind issued to elite units, nearly pristine despite the devastation surrounding it. The armor was sleek, matte black, with subtle crimson markings along the shoulders and chest. Unlike standard military issue, this was custom-fitted, designed for someone important. The neural interface panel on the neck was still intact, its inactive lights hinting at potential functionality. Corey's mind raced with calculations. A suit like this could fetch enough to get him off-world, maybe even enough to buy a new identity, a fresh start somewhere beyond the reach of both corporate and alliance jurisdiction. He didn't think. He just reached for it. And at that moment, put it down, or you'll be next. The voice came from behind him, female and hoarse, like sand grinding against metal. And not human. Corey froze, muscles tensing. Survival instinct kicked in. The same instinct that had kept him alive through years of scavenging on this death-filled planet. He didn't turn, didn't raise his hands. Any sudden movement could trigger a shot. "I'm just salvaging," he said, voice steady despite the rapid hammering of his heart. "No harm in it. Turn around, slowly." He complied, keeping his movements deliberate. As he turned, the figure came into view. She stood on a ruined platform about 20 meters away, the broken structure rising like a jagged tooth from the wasteland. Her uniform was torn, once pristine fabric now stained with dust and what looked like dried blood. Bandages wrapped her right arm and crossed her torso, dingy white against her blue skin. Blue skin, a scar from neck to collarbone, eyes, fire and ice. Not human, Valrathi, if he had to guess. One of the mercenary species contracted by both sides during the war, known for their precision, their loyalty, and their unforgiving memory. She held a pulse rifle with practiced ease, the weapon's energy cell glowing faintly blue in the dim light. Her posture was military, rigid despite what must have been significant injuries. The way she balanced suggested training beyond standard combat procedures. "You have no idea what that is," she said, her voice carrying across the distance between them. Corey kept his hands visible, away from the small blade strapped to his thigh, his only weapon. "It's armor, metal." "It's a sentence, for him, and now, for you." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning he couldn't yet decipher. The wind picked up, whistling through the skeletal remains of the outpost, carrying the eternal dust that seemed to be Kelmar's only renewable resource. Corey studied her. The rifle didn't waver, but something in her stance suggested exhaustion. How long had she been out here? Days? Weeks? Her eyes narrowed, assessing him with equal scrutiny. "I'm just trying to survive," he said, testing the waters. "Like everyone else left behind." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in those unsettling eyes. One amber, one pale blue, both burning with an intensity that made him want to look away. Then unexpectedly, she lowered her weapon. Not completely, just enough to signal a temporary truce. "Take nothing else from this place," she said. She turned, preparing to disappear back into the ruins. "Wait," Corey called out, surprised at his own boldness. "What's so special about this armor?" She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "It belongs to the dead. Let it stay that way." And then she was gone, moving with surprising grace for someone so clearly injured, vanishing among the twisted remains of the outpost. Corey stood motionless, considering his options. The rational choice was clear. Walk away, find other salvage, live another day. But his eyes drifted back to the armor. Something didn't add up. The Valrathi woman hadn't shot him. She hadn't even truly threatened him. She had simply walked away. But Corey felt it. Behind that gaze was no threat. It was a curse, a warning wrapped in resignation, as if she knew her words would go unheeded. He knelt beside the armor again, running his fingers along its surface. No identification marks, no unit insignia, just that unusual crimson pattern, subtle but distinctive. He'd seen similar suits during the war, worn by specialized command units. Looking in the direction the Valrathi had disappeared, he made his decision, and he picked the armor up anyway. The night on Kelmar was bitter cold, a stark contrast to the scorching days. Corey had made camp in the remains of what had once been a communications bunker. Walls thick enough to block the worst of the wind and provide some security against predators, both animal and human. He'd managed to get a small fire going, using chemically treated fuel blocks that burned with minimal smoke. The dancing flames cast shifting shadows across the bunker walls, illuminating the armor he'd propped against his pack. In the firelight, the crimson markings seemed almost to move, winding patterns that reminded him of ancient script. He'd spent hours examining it, finding no obvious damage beyond superficial scratches. The power cell was intact but dormant. If he could reactivate it, the suit alone would be worth a fortune. A sound outside, the soft displacement of rubble under a careful foot. Corey's hand moved to his blade, muscles tensing. He waited, controlling his breathing as he'd learned to do during his military days. The Valrathi woman appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the starlit sky. She stood there for a long moment, observing him, the armor, the small fire. "You didn't listen," she said finally. "I rarely do," Corey replied, keeping his voice even. "Hasn't killed me yet." A sound escaped her, something between a scoff and a laugh, bitter and resigned. "There's always a first time." She stepped into the bunker, moving with caution. Not fear of him, he realized, but caution born of pain. Her movements were those of someone navigating around injuries, preserving strength. They didn't need trust, just warmth and answers. She settled on the opposite side of the fire, her rifle within reach but not in her hands. The flames illuminated her features more clearly now. Her blue skin was marked with pale scars beyond the prominent one at her neck. Stories written in flesh. Her eyes reflected the fire, giving them an otherworldly glow. "You should have left it," she said, nodding toward the armor. "Probably," Corey agreed, "but curiosity gets the better of me sometimes." "Curiosity?" She tested the word as if it were unfamiliar. "Is that what drives a man to scavenge battlefields?" "Hunger is more accurate." She studied him for a long moment. "You're military, or were." Corey didn't ask how she knew. His posture, his movements, the way he'd set up his camp, all would be obvious tells to someone with training. "A lifetime ago," he acknowledged. "Technical corps. Nothing glorious. And now? Now I'm just a man trying to stay alive on a dead planet." Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Corey reached into his pack and withdrew a ration pack, tearing it open and offering half to her. A peace offering of sorts. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. Her skin was cooler than a human's would be, another marker of her species. "That was the armor of Commander Lane S. Gray," she said finally, between careful bites of the tasteless protein compound. "He didn't die in combat. He was betrayed." Corey's eyes moved to the suit, seeing it with new understanding. "By who?" "His own. Because he tried to save the hostages instead of torching the sector. The implications hung heavy in the air. Corey had heard rumors during the war, whispers of entire civilian populations used as shields, of hard decisions made in command rooms far from the front lines. "You knew him," Corey said. It wasn't a question. "I served under him." Her gaze remained fixed on the fire. He was different. He believed the war could be won without becoming the enemy. Corey studied the armor with renewed interest. As a former technician, he had worked with similar systems, maintaining and occasionally repairing them. The neural interface was complex but not unfamiliar. "Mind if I take a closer look?" he asked, gesturing toward the suit. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to cost her some pain. "It's already done. The moment you touched it, you became part of this." Not understanding but intrigued, Corey moved to the armor and began examining it more methodically. The power cell was inactive but not depleted. The interface systems were intact. With the right sequence, his fingers moved with practiced precision, accessing panels hidden within the armor's structure, bypassing security protocols with techniques he'd learned during his service. It was like riding a hover cycle. The body remembered even when the mind tried to forget. A soft hum emanated from the suit as systems activated, dim lights flickering to life along the spine and neural connection points. The chest plate illuminated with a faint crimson glow, the same shade as the markings. "It still works," he murmured, surprised. "Of course it works," the Valrathi woman said, her voice tight. "They built it to last, even after they killed the man inside it." Corey activated the helmet interface, a holographic display materializing above the collar segment. Access codes, command logs, communication records, all protected behind high-level encryption. But there was one file accessible without clearance, marked with a simple designation. Final, a recording, a helmet's internal log. Lane's final words. With a glance at the Valrathi, Corey initiated playback. A flickering image appeared above the armor. A man's face, human, perhaps in his 40s. Strong features, weathered by war, eyes that held both authority and exhaustion. Commander Lane S. Gray, presumably. The image was distorted, degraded by whatever had happened to the armor after recording. "If someone sees this, I'm already dead." The voice was clear despite the visual distortion, carrying the weight of command even in its final message. "Not by enemies, by my own. They ordered the Callisto Protocol, complete purge. I refused. I had found another way." The image flickered, stabilized. Sector 7 was filled with civilians. Alliance hostages, yes, but also their own people left behind. The order was to sanitize, no witnesses, no evidence. They called it acceptable losses. I called it murder. A pause filled with static. I deployed teams to extract. We had the capability. We had the time. But the order came down. My refusal was noted. My command was revoked. Bitterness crept into his voice. "They erased my voice. Let someone, anyone, bring it back." The recording ended, the holographic display dissolving into particles of light that scattered and faded. Silence filled the bunker, heavier than before. Corey looked up at the Valrathi woman, whose eyes were fixed on the space where the commander's image had been. "There's more," he said, noticing another accessible file. Another recording. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded once, a sharp movement. Corey activated the second file. Commander Lane's voice returned, but this time without visuals, the recording more damaged than the first. Addendum to final log. Those who stood with me were marked as traitors, executed or worse. Private Ishria Kaltar refused to execute the command. Tried to extract civilians. For that, she wasn't executed. She was erased. Corey's eyes snapped to the Valrathi woman across the fire. Ishria Kaltar. He hadn't learned her name from her. He heard it in the second recording. Officially listed as killed in action. Actually abandoned, identity stripped, left behind enemy lines to die. But she didn't die. She's still out there. If anyone finds this, find her. She's the last witness, the last proof. They can't erase us all. The recording ended, leaving only the soft crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind through the ruined bunker. Now she sat by the fire, her eyes burning through the night, through him, through the walls of the bunker to some distant point only she could see. "You saw it all?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Then you're like me now, a witness, or the next one to die. Exactly. Ashria, he had a name for her now, reached for her rifle, checking it with practiced movements. They monitor for activation signals. Old tech, but persistent. When you powered up the armor, you triggered a beacon. A beacon to who? Corey asked, already suspecting the answer. To those who want to keep secrets buried. Her amber eyes seemed to glow brighter than the blue one, reflecting her inner fire. To those who erase inconvenient truths. Corey stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the bunker. I didn't ask for this. I'm a scavenger, not whatever this is. His hands shook slightly as he gathered his few belongings. I need to go, now, before they track the signal. Ashria watched him with cold contempt forming in her eyes. Running? After everything you just heard? Surviving, Corey corrected, slinging his pack over his shoulder. That's what I do. That's all I do. He gestured toward the armor. Take it. It's your commander's legacy, not mine. And you think that will save you? The derision in her voice was palpable. When you activated the recording, the armor triggered a resonance protocol, old tracking tech. It doesn't just log the activation, it marks the activator. You're now the new target, as if the commander had returned and resumed an unauthorized mission. The implications sank in slowly. They're tracking me? Through what? Quantum entanglement at the neural level. The moment you interfaced with the command systems, it registered your biometric signature. Her expression held no sympathy, only a bitter disappointment. Anyone who might know is being purged. And now you can't run. Corey stood frozen, his escape plan crumbling before him. Then I'll hide. Find somewhere remote. I've survived this long. Coward, Ashria spat, turning away from him. The commander chose to die rather than be silent. And you, she shook her head. You're not worthy of carrying his voice. Something in her dismissal stung more than Corey expected. He paused at the bunker entrance, looking out at the wasteland beyond, his familiar territory of isolation and mere survival. What would you do? He asked quietly. If you were me, I'd choose to be something more than just another forgotten corpse on a dead planet. She didn't look at him as she spoke. But I've made my choices. Make yours. Without another word, Corey stepped out into the night. He made it 3 kilometers before the weight of what he'd learned began to crush him. The commander's voice echoed in his mind. They erased my voice. Let someone, anyone, bring it back. By dawn, Corey found himself perched on a ridge overlooking the bunker he'd abandoned. Through his scavenged scope, he watched as Ashria emerged, armor components carefully packed, rifle at the ready. She paused, scanning the horizon. Not for him, he realized, but for threats. Always vigilant, always alone. 5 years. Surviving not just for herself, but for a truth no one wanted heard, and he had walked away. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. He had spent years surviving, but for what? To find another day's rations? To delay the inevitable end that came to all who lingered too long on Kelmar? He watched her set off across the wasteland, her movements efficient despite her injuries, following some internal compass toward what she believed mattered. Corey made his decision. It took him until midday to track her. She moved with purpose, avoiding open terrain, using the ruined landscape as cover. When he finally caught up, she was crouched behind a collapsed wall, observing something through her scope. He approached carefully, making just enough noise to alert her without seeming threatening. She pivoted smoothly, rifle raised, eyes narrowing when she recognized him. You're back, she stated flatly, not lowering her weapon. I am. Why? The single word carried years of suspicion, of betrayal. Corey met her gaze steadily. Because surviving isn't living, and because... He hesitated, organizing thoughts he'd never before put into words. Because I've been running from the same things you've been fighting? Different uniforms, same war. She studied him, searching for deception. The rifle remained aimed at his chest. I thought you were just like them, she said finally, her voice softer, but no less cutting. Another one who hears the truth and walks away. I was, Corey admitted. For a few hours I was. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps recognition. Slowly, she lowered her rifle. There are others, she said. Survivors from the commander's unit. If they're still alive, They'll want to hear this. And if they're not, Eshria's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Then we're truly the last ones, and the truth dies with us. They left the bunker before dawn, when the stars still shone cold and distant in Kelmar's hazy sky. Corey had packed the armor, disassembling it into component pieces to distribute the weight more evenly across his pack. Eshria moved with military precision despite her injuries, scanning horizons, selecting paths that offered cover. They walked together, not as partners, as living shadows who weren't supposed to exist. The day passed in near silence, communication limited to necessary warnings about terrain or potential threats. Corey learned to read her signals, a raised hand for stop, a subtle gesture indicating direction changes. By midday, they moved almost in sync, two parts of a survival mechanism honed by necessity. "How long have you been out here?" Corey asked during a brief rest in the shadow of a crashed transport vessel, its hull torn open like a gutted animal. Eshria took a measured sip from her canteen before answering. 1,874 days. Kelmar standard. Over 5 years. Alone in this wasteland, hunted, erased from existence. "How did you survive?" "One day at a time." She scanned the horizon, eyes narrowed against the harsh sunlight. Learned which ruins had supplies, which had threats. Became a ghost. "And the others? The survivors you mentioned?" "Scattered. Hiding. Some in plain sight with new identities. Others, like me, in the spaces between." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Why did you desert?" The question caught him off guard. "Who said I deserted?" "Your eyes did. When you mentioned your service. Technical Corps don't become scavengers unless they're running from something." Corey looked away, focusing on adjusting the straps of his pack. "I was stationed on the Heliox mining colony, support staff for the defense grid. When the Alliance attacked, Command ordered us to overload the Corps, create a chain reaction." "Scorched earth," Eshria observed. "Exactly. Except the colony had 30,000 civilians. Miners, families, support staff." Corey's voice grew tight. "They said evacuation wasn't an option, that sacrifices were necessary. So you left." "I sabotaged the overload sequence, made it look like a system failure. The memory still burned, even after all these years. Then I disappeared in the chaos. Let them think I died in the assault." Eshria studied him with new interest. "You chose the many over orders." "I chose not to be a murderer." Corey met her gaze. "Same as your commander." Something passed between them then, a recognition perhaps. Not trust, but understanding. They were both traitors to their respective sides, bound by choices that had seemed right even as they carried devastating personal consequences. "We should move," she said finally, rising with fluid grace despite her injuries. "Still a long way to the meeting point." They continued through the afternoon, navigating the blasted landscape with increasing coordination. Twice they froze at the sound of engines overhead. "Patrol crafts," Eshria explained in whispers. "Not regular military. Something else. Hunters." By evening, they reached what had once been a city's outskirts, now reduced to crumbling structures and collapsed roadways. Eshria led them through a labyrinth of ruins with the confidence of someone who had walked this path many times before. "Close now," she murmured as darkness fell completely. "Keep alert. They don't trust easily." "Do they trust you?" Corey asked. The question earned him a ghost of a smile. There and gone in an instant. "They trust that I'm still alive when I shouldn't be. That counts for something." They entered what had once been an industrial zone. Massive processing facilities reduced to twisted frameworks silhouetted against the night sky. Eshria moved with increased caution, signaling Corey to stay close. A flicker of light ahead, brief, controlled, a signal. Eshria responded with a series of hand gestures, complex and precise. Military code, but not standard issue. Something developed among survivors. Figures materialized from the shadows. 3 of them, armed but not aiming. One stepped forward, features becoming visible in the dim light filtering through a collapsed ceiling. An old man with a rusted neural socket embedded in his temple, the skin around it scarred and puckered. His left arm ended at the elbow, replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic that whirred softly as he moved. "Eshria?" he asked, voice rough with age and disbelief. "You were supposed to be—" "Quiet," she interrupted. her tone softening the command. "I brought proof, and someone who can activate it." The old man's attention shifted to Corey, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You brought him?" "He came himself," Ishria replied. "I just didn't shoot him." A tense silence followed, broken when one of the other figures, a woman with burned scars covering half her face, stepped forward. "Inside," she said, gesturing toward a structure that appeared more intact than its surroundings. "Before the drones make another pass." They followed the trio into what had once been a refueling station, now converted into a makeshift hideout. The space was Spartan but organized, showing signs of long-term occupation. Stored supplies, defensive positions, communication equipment cobbled together from salvaged parts. 2 more individuals waited inside. A young man missing both legs below the knee, seated in a modified hover chair, and a non-human figure whose species Corey couldn't immediately identify, its features obscured by an environmental mask. "This is what's left of Lane's Special Operations Unit," Eshria explained quietly to Corey, "the ones who refused the order." The old man with the neural socket approached them again, studying Corey with open distrust. "Taryn says you have the commander's armor." Corey glanced at Eshria, realizing Taryn must be one of her aliases. He nodded, unsettling his pack and carefully withdrawing the components. "And proof," he added. "Recordings." His final log. A ripple went through the small group. Tension, hope, fear. The old man's mechanical hand flexed, servos whining. "If you're lying," he began. "I'm not," Corey interrupted, assembling the critical components of the armor on a cleared table. "But I understand your caution. I wouldn't trust me either." Working methodically, he reconnected the power systems and neural interface, bringing the armor back to partial activation. The familiar hum filled the room, crimson markings glowing softly in the dim light. "Commander Lane's personal armor," the woman with the burn scars whispered, approaching cautiously. "After all this time." "How do we know it's genuine?" demanded the young man in the hover chair, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Watch," Corey said simply, initializing the playback sequence. Commander Lane's image materialized above the armor components, flickering but unmistakable. His voice filled the small space, recounting his refusal of orders, his betrayal by his own command. They played the recording, and everyone who heard it stood, some in rage, some in shame. The old man with the neural socket sank to his knees, mechanical hand pressed against the floor for support. "It's him," he said, voice breaking. "It's really him." The second recording played, the one naming Eshria, explaining her fate. The survivors turned to her, seeing her with new understanding. No longer just a ghost who had survived against impossible odds, but living proof of the commander's claims. "You've carried this all this time," the burn-scarred woman said to Eshria. "Alone?" "Not anymore," Eshria replied, her eyes meeting Corey's briefly. Plans formed quickly after that. Discussions of how to use the evidence, who might still be trusted in various outposts and colonies, channels through which the truth might be disseminated. Corey noticed at first the absence. One of the figures who had escorted them in, a thin man with nervous eyes, was no longer present. "Where's the third one?" he asked quietly, interrupting the planning. Silence fell, heads turning, eyes searching the small space. The old man cursed, lurching to his feet. "Valen, he was here when the recording started." "Check the comm station," the burn-scarred woman said urgently, already moving toward a jury-rigged console in the corner. But they all knew. One of them slipped away into the night and sold them out. "How long?" Eshria asked, her voice deadly calm as she checked her rifle. "Minutes if we're lucky," the old man replied. "Less if he had a direct channel." Corey moved quickly, reassembling the critical components of the armor. Not to wear, it wasn't sized for him and would be more hindrance than help, but to secure the evidence. "Is there another way out?" he asked. The young man in the hover chair activated controls on his armrest, bringing up a holographic display of the surrounding area. "Maintenance tunnels there and there," he indicated, "but they'll expect that. They know this place." "Then we don't run," Eshria said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We make a stand. We make them work for it." The survivors exchanged glances, a silent communication born of shared experience and trust. Then, with practiced efficiency, they began preparing defensive positions. "You should go," the old man told Corey, pressing a compact energy pistol into his hand. "Take the armor. Find someone else who'll listen." Corey looked at the weapon, then at the survivors preparing to fight, perhaps to die for a truth they had protected for years. "No," he said finally. "I'm already marked. Might as well make it count." The old man studied him for a moment, then nodded once sharply. "Martin Krev," he introduced himself belatedly. "Chief Engineer, Special Operations Division." "Corey Ryden," he replied. "Former Technical Specialist, Defense Systems." A grim smile touched Martin's weathered face. "Technical Specialist, huh? Good. We'll need that." They came at dawn. No insignias, no colors, no words. The attack began with precision strikes from above, targeted explosions designed to collapse key structural points of the building. But the survivors had anticipated this, reinforcing critical areas and creating false weak points to channel the assault. Corey worked with Martin to activate the refueling station's dormant defense systems, repurposing old protocols to serve their needs. Years of scavenging had taught him improvisation. Years of military training had taught him application. The first wave hit from multiple directions, armored figures moving with the coordination of extensive training. Not regular military, something darker. Erasure teams designed to eliminate inconvenient truths. One shouted, "Rear! Return the armor!" Corey found himself at the main defensive position alongside Ashria. The crimson markings on the armor components pulsed with increasing intensity, as if responding to the presence of the attackers. Without thinking, he stood, moving between Ashria and the advancing Erasure team. "Corey, get down!" Ashria shouted, trying to pull him back into cover. But he remained standing, the armor component in his hand glowing brighter. The advancing figures slowed, weapons trained on him. Time seemed to stretch, the moment expanding into something pivotal, something that would define everything that came after. "It's not armor," he called out, his voice steady and clear in the sudden stillness. "It's a voice. And if you kill me, you will finally silence it." The words hung in the air, a heartbeat of silence. Then a shot rang out, the energy blast striking Corey squarely in the chest. The impact threw him backward, a searing pain blooming where the armor's neural connection points had interfaced with his skin. Ishria screamed, a sound of rage more than grief, as she returned fire with devastating precision. A firefight exploded, the confined space filling with weapons fire and shouted commands. Corey, dazed but alive, the armor component had absorbed much of the blast, struggled to his feet. Ashria moved with lethal precision, each shot finding its mark. He provided covering fire, allowing the others to reposition. The burn-scarred woman, Sarah, he'd learned during preparations, coordinated their defense, her tactical officer experience evident in her quick decisions and clear commands. They held the first wave back, but the second came harder, using breaching charges to create new entry points. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of melted metal. Corey found himself back-to-back with Ashria, defending a critical choke point. "On your left," she called, her voice steady despite the chaos. He pivoted, firing 3 rapid shots that dropped an advancing figure. The shield he'd improvised from station plating absorbed a retaliatory blast, the impact driving him back a step. "Not bad for a technician," Ishria commented, taking down 2 more attackers with precise headshots. "I'm a quick study," Corey replied, wincing as a glancing shot caught his arm, burning through fabric to sear flesh. The fight intensified, ammunition running low, injuries mounting. Martin fell back, his mechanical arm damaged and sparking. Sarah took a hit to her shoulder but continued directing their defense, her voice growing hoarser with each command. A massive explosion rocked the eastern wall, creating a breach larger than any before. Through the smoke and debris, a squad of Erasure team members poured in, cutting off Ashria from the rest of the group. "Fall back!" Sarah shouted, but Ashria was pinned down, unable to retreat without being exposed to devastating crossfire. To everyone's surprise, it was Nera who moved, charging forward with unexpected ferocity. "Cover me!" she yelled, abandoning her position to reach Ashria. Corey provided suppressing fire as Nera reached Ashria's position. The 2 women crouched behind failing cover as energy blasts tore chunks from their shelter. "Why?" Ashria demanded, her voice barely audible over the combat. Nera's expression was grim. "Because I heard him. Because he would have done the same." She checked her weapon, nearly depleted. "And because I was wrong about you." Before Ashria could respond, Nera activated something on her wrist. An old combat enhancer, the kind that pushed the body beyond safe limits. Get back to the others, she ordered. I'll clear a path. Nera, don't! But the lieutenant was already moving, her body enhanced to impossible speed, firing with deadly accuracy as she charged the enemy position. She created the opening she'd promised, a clear path for Eshria to rejoin the others, but at devastating cost. Nera fell, multiple energy blasts tearing through her enhanced body, but not before taking 6 Erasure team members with her. Eshria made it back, her face a mask of complex emotions as she rejoined Corey. She saved me, she said, voice tight. After all this time, she heard the truth, Corey replied simply. It changed things. Corey was hit again, a more serious wound this time. Energy blast to the upper chest, the impact throwing him against a wall. Pain bloomed, sharp and immediate, as Eshria pulled him into cover. Stay down, she ordered, applying a pressure seal to the wound with practiced movements. Can't, he gasped, fighting through the pain. Need to broadcast. Her eyes met his, understanding dawning. The recordings, the evidence. It wasn't enough to survive. They needed the truth to survive with them. She helped him to the communication console where the young man in the hover chair, Davin, was working frantically to establish a secure channel. How wide can we broadcast? Corey asked through gritted teeth. Local only, Davin replied, fingers flying across the controls. Maybe 50 kilometers radius. The main relays are gone. It's enough, Eshria said. The settlements within that range, they'll spread it further. Corey connected the armor's neural interface to the console, overriding security protocols to access the recordings. His vision blurred with pain, but his hands remained steady. The work familiar, a return to his roots as a technician. There's a problem, Davin said suddenly, his face grim. The transmitter's damaged. Someone needs to manually hold the connection point and complete the circuit. I'll do it, Corey said immediately. It's outside, Davin continued, exposed to enemy fire. And once it starts, you can't move or the connection breaks. You'd be a perfect target. Eshria shook her head. No, I'll go. You can't, Corey argued. The armor's keyed to me now. The neural pattern won't accept anyone else. It wasn't entirely true, a partial lie born of necessity. This is my part to play. Before she could argue further, another explosion rocked the building. We're out of time, Martin called from his position. Ready, Corey said finally, taking the connection module from Davin. Cover me as long as you can. Eshria caught his arm. Corey? I know, he said. Their eyes met. Volumes communicated in that brief moment. 30 seconds once you're in position, Davin instructed. That's all we need. Corey moved toward the external access point, Eshria and Martin providing covering fire as he reached the exposed transmitter array. The pain in his chest was excruciating, but he forced it aside, focusing on the task. With trembling hands, he connected the armor's interface to the transmitter and activated the sequence. Immediately, the armor component began to pulse with crimson light, the neural connection points burning into his skin as the transmission initiated. He was completely exposed, a perfect target silhouetted against the dawn sky. The firing suddenly stopped. Through the dust and smoke, a figure emerged, taller than the others, wearing officer's insignia on a pristine Erasure team uniform. Enough, the officer called, voice amplified. You've put up an impressive fight, more than we expected from ghosts. Corey remained motionless, the transmission still preparing. 20 seconds left. We can end this now, the officer continued. Walk away. Leave the armor. Deactivate the transmission. Your lives will be spared. 15 seconds. You've survived this long, the officer pressed. Why throw it away now? For what? For whom? For a dead commander? For civilians you never knew? Is it worth dying for? The Erasure teams held their positions, weapons trained but not firing, waiting. 10 seconds. One of the Erasure team members stepped forward, weapon aimed directly at Corey's heart. If you press that button, you won't leave here alive, he shouted, voice cracking with tension. In that moment, movement caught Corey's eye. Eshria, emerging from her cover, rifle lowered. Without hesitation, without fear, she crossed the open ground between them, energy blasts scorching the earth where her feet had been moments before. She moved with purpose, her eyes never leaving his. She stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder. No words, none needed. Her presence beside him said everything. 5 seconds. Corey's gaze returned to the Erasure team, to their weapons, to the officer whose face had gone rigid with fury and fear. "Then neither will you," Corey said simply, and pressed the button. Transmission complete. Commander Lane's voice echoed through the station and beyond, carrying across the wasteland to anyone with a receiver. His final testimony, his refusal to sacrifice innocence, his betrayal by those he had served. As the recording played, Corey collapsed, the world going dark around him. The last thing he felt was Ashriya's arms catching him as he fell. And when only 3 stood in the end, Corey, unconscious but alive, Ashriya, blood-streaked but unbowed, and Martin, his mechanical arm hanging useless at his side, the recording played one final time. Commander Lane's voice clear and resolute. "I'm no hero. But if you're hearing this, truth still lives. Let it wound, but let it be heard." The fight ended. Only smoke, dust, and bodies remained. But among them, 2 silhouettes still standing. Ashriya, her blue skin marked with fresh wounds alongside old scars, cradling Corey's unconscious form. Martin, leaning heavily against a shattered wall, watching the horizon where figures were beginning to appear. Corey lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. The burn across his chest pulsed with crimson light in the shape of the armor's neural connection points. A mark that would never fade, the price of truth etched into his flesh. Ashriya gently laid him down, arranging his body carefully before draping the armor components over her shoulder, its markings still glowing faintly in the dusty air. Martin had survived but was badly injured, his remaining natural arm now sporting a tourniquet fashioned from torn fabric. Sarah, Davin, and Nira had fallen in the final push, their sacrifices buying the critical moments needed to complete the transmission. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the ruined landscape. In the distance, movement, civilians from nearby settlements drawn by the broadcast, approaching cautiously to investigate. Corey stirred, consciousness returning gradually through waves of pain. His eyes found Ashriya, who knelt beside him as the newcomers gathered around. "What now?" he asked, his voice rough from smoke and pain. Ashriya looked out at the approaching figures, then back at the armor she carried. "We burn everything old. And we build something that doesn't need to hide." Her eyes, fire and ice, met his, something new in their depths. Not hope, exactly. Purpose. "Together?" he asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple syllables suggested. "If you don't walk away." There was challenge in her voice, but also an offering, the possibility of something beyond mere survival. He didn't walk away. In the days that followed, the recording spread beyond their initial broadcast. Communication relays carried it from settlement to settlement, outpost to outpost. Those who had served under Commander Lane came forward with corroborating testimony. Those who had participated in the cover-up began to face questions they couldn't answer. The name Lane S. Gray returned to the archives. In some sectors, his symbol began to appear, not as a memorial, but as a promise, a reminder that truth could survive even the most determined efforts to erase it. And somewhere, under a setting sun on a planet that was slowly, painfully beginning to heal, 2 figures stood atop the highest point of the ruined outpost. He standing on a pile of rubble, the smoke of battle still rising behind him, his burn across his chest pulsing with the same crimson pattern as the armor, visible through his torn clothing. Beneath his feet, the shattered faceplate of the officer who had given the order to purge Sector 7, retrieved from the battlefield as proof that even those who erased could themselves be erased. She, blue skin illuminated by the dying light, arms raised high above her head, holding the assembled armor not as protection, but as a symbol, a beacon, its markings glowing against the darkening sky. The fragment of Commander Lane's insignia embedded in its center, catching the last rays of sunlight. Behind them on the ground lay the fallen banner of the Central Corporation, its once proud emblem now torn and trampled in the dust. Next to it, the broken components of erasure team badges, scattered like dead leaves, the symbols of those who had tried to bury the truth, now themselves buried in history. They were not the saved, they were the remaining. And from that moment on, nothing would be hidden again.